Welcome back. Welcome in. This is Country Roads Confidential at earsports.com, a Paramount podcast. I am Mike Casazza, joined by Chris Anderson here a little later in the week because the first edition of our mailbag presented on Monday just overflowed. Too much fun, too much information. Decided we shouldn't cut it off there. Coming back today with longer arm to reach in and grab out the rest of the questions. These are all going to be about football because football remains top of the mind, tip of the tongue, bottom of the bag, I guess, but that doesn't stop us from talking about the major preoccupation here, especially as things seem so interesting, Chris, with the way the roster is going and why it's happening this way. And honestly, moves that are happening, preview moves that are unexpected and may be difficult to explain, which is why we are here. This is kind of the new normal, I guess, huh?
Yes, it is. And yeah, there's been several questions related to these late additions and West Virginia's current situation. So let's hop right in and ask them and hopefully answer them, at least somewhat.
Mm.
Earstein says, how does WVU reconcile the number of available scholarships with the number of players committed to playing for WVU this season? Um, and Dolis says similar thing with the transfer portal closed. What will happen to the two or more players that have to leave the football team? So current situation, 87 players signed, enrolled, or currently committed to the West Virginia University Mountaineers football team. The limit is 85. That means at least two players that are expected to be part of the team will not be part of the team in the fall. How does that happen? First off, there's a couple different ways this goes. I mean, the portal's closed because guys aren't transferring. You're not going to see guys transfer. But I've mentioned it on the board before. Sometimes there's guys who just call it a career. They're done or they medically retire. We saw that back in February when running back DJ Oliver and defensive lineman Zyke Lawton were no longer with the team, but the portal was closed. Hey, what's happening? Neither one appeared in the portal when it opened. As we found out later, Lawton medically retired. DJ Oliver heard rumors that he was just done with football. And that's that. There's two scholarships gone with no additions, no need for the transfer portal to be open. I expect something similar to that this summer. Maybe some guys who are, again, older, they're graduating, saying, hey, why go through another off season of all this work, another preseason of all this work to be a fifth year senior who's, third on the depth chart? I don't think that description fits anybody. I was intentionally vague about that, but those kind of situations. And also, just because a player signed at high school, this sounds crazy, Mike, but you still have to be academically eligible. It is still a thing that happens in
No
college.
waiver for that. Yeah.
No waiver for that. I'm haven't heard anything specific about anybody, but there are still guys who are signed but not yet enrolled. Maybe one isn't able to make it. Maybe one other guy decides to retire. Bam, you're at 85. But I was reliably informed. Let me pull this up here on my phone. And I quote, we will be at 85 by the time we need to be. Also, stop reading my texts and referring to me as a capital P person. So
I
there we
warned you,
go.
Chris. Yeah. So let me ask you this, because you might have asked this question. I think of 85 and I think of the way that just college sports in general are, and that's not enough for some people. Just not enough. I think about last summer, 13 basketball scholarships for West Virginia. They're like, we're just going to get two guys to walk on, but they're going to be like scholarship players because 13 wasn't enough. When I think about this pending revenue sharing, per team cap of 17 to 22 million dollars, part of the warning that was included in that language was expanded roster sizes for scholarships. So perhaps 85 goes to, well, never mind 87, 90, 92, 100. Do you get any of that foreboding, whatever, from the trees that you shake?
I mean, that was the first question I asked, right? Like I was like, oh, okay, they're just going over, still recruiting others as well, other transfers. Maybe the rules about to change. Because here's the thing,
Yeah.
like I know this might catch some people off guard because I know there's some negative Nancy's that listen to this that maybe don't believe in Neil Brown and the coaching staff, even after the 9-win season, but they're smart. They know what's happening. A lot of times the moves they are making as far as roster building and as far as how they practice, how they prepare, how they recruit guys is because they know a rule is coming down the pipeline and they're okay that, they're getting ahead of the curve. So my first thought was, oh, they already know scholarship limits going up to 90. And that's why they're just moving forward with this. They
Yeah.
did that with official visits before. They knew that the official visits were going to get bumped up for a couple years because of COVID and all the transfers and everything like that. So that was my first thought. And then you see that, hey, now they're trying to change rules in basketball about unlimited official visits allowed per school. So a school can host as many official visits as they want. Again, that's not going to be a factor for the smaller schools, but the big schools will take advantage of that. Is that going to go from just basketball to football?
Probably not, right?
Right? Like it's going to be tough. Like, I mean, I mentioned this on the board when I was trying to figure out about that bump up in the official visits and what the limit was and if it was going to carry over another year because West Virginia had reached that limit again this offseason. Um, my capital P people in Morgantown played coy with it. Some capital P people that are at group of five schools said, I have no idea. And quite frankly, I don't care because we don't have the budget to even get near the cap in official visits. And meanwhile, West Virginia and presumably all of the Power Four schools are maxing out and trying to find ways around it. So we'll see what happens with that front. But as far as the scholarships go, man, I just can't help shake that feeling that it's going to go above 85 at some point.
Yeah, one thing too that you mentioned that got my attention. They've always been like a step ahead or at least right on the scent of coming rule changes or like how things should be going as opposed to how they are going. Rewind like 2 years to NIL, and athletic director is no longer here, and then football hits the ground and takes off and has two pretty good NIL off seasons back to back. Not saying that they forced the athletic director change, thought things could have been done better, more ambitiously, certainly more effectively, and were ready to go once that change took effect. So, to your point, I think they do see around some corners that maybe we don't. Maybe they got longer necks or better ears than we do. But if the time comes for a change to be in place, they're more often than not ready to go and to take advantage of something that's new and different.
Speaking of being on top of things, in Hunter 17 says, you guys are on top of that uniform info. Not you guys. That was Mike. Maybe you can dig a little more into this. Expand your horizons, Mike. You ready? Is the football field getting new turf this year? I also heard Mountaineer Field was getting the new flashing LED lights. Mike, what can you tell us?
I think it would be too late to do turf, don't you?
Yes. Yeah. They
Okay.
they did that. Felt like right. Well, no. I mean, I guess it's only a couple weeks after the spring game. I feel like the last time they did that, but that was also the flattening out of the crown.
Yeah.
They got on that quick. Like there was no that was right after the season, right? Then they start that right after like that, not spring season, regular season
Right.
ended. So that was a little more than just turf, but yeah, you're pushing your luck here because yeah, if they switch to turf, that's one less place where they can also practice
Camps too.
this summer. Yeah, and camps and all the oh man, camp season. Imagine 400 kids and not being able to use one of the fields. That would be terrible.
No, because I mean, that would be difficult where they can easily go to the practice facility and get some of their group and individual stuff in. I've not heard turf. To the other question, LED lights, I've heard that. I've heard audio. I've heard just a lot of the in-game stuff they want to overhaul and do it. I don't know when though. And just this goes back to a point on Monday, a question someone asked. You can only reach into your pockets so many times and so far, and you can't come out with everything you want right now. I just don't think. I mean, if it comes down to we've got to pay $17 million to our players, or we got to have some LED lights for 55,000 people 7 Saturdays a year, sorry, you're going to lose out on that one there too. So expenses like that, this would be a better answer to the question on Monday, as opposed. I think it was in reference to Iowa State and their wrestling facility not being built. I think you have to tap the brakes on some stuff. I'm not saying this is it right now, but I just wonder how ambitious they can be until they know what this settlement is going to look like and what's required of them. That said, I do know that they have had some ideas and some suggestions, whether it's cocktail napkin or like formal pitches as to what things should look like and what they want to do. That's been what I've heard about, just that in-game experience, the stuff that you see on TV that looks really cool. How can you bring that to Mountaineer Field? That's what they want to do, I think. I just don't know when that'll be the case. And above all else, something bigger like suites would be a priority over the LED lights, I think.
Next question from RVA Ear says, last year there was a lot of talk about speeding football up. Did the rule changes actually work?
No, because we have more rule changes this year to speed the game up. Next question.
As I say, I'll keep it short too. I decided to check, at least from the WVU front, the rule change. What was the statistic given in the rule changes was the average game was 3 hours and 22 minutes long. For West Virginia last season, 3 hours and 26 minutes, not counting Duquesne. Um, I
Oh,
checked,
because the
you check,
delay. Yeah.
yeah, because it was delayed and it said 5+ hours. So I was like, yeah, that seems unfair to count that one. But all the other games, average of 3 hours and 26. So still longer by 4 minutes than the average FBS football game that forced the changes in the first place. So the answer is no, not working yet.
I don't know how they fix
Uh,
that either. I really don't. I mean, it's short of like I mean, they have clocks and everything right now too. I think about like what baseball did with the pitch clock. That's like the only clock in baseball. Everything else in football's on a clock. Like where you adding a clock to do stuff? I don't know. Unless you're making things shorter, which is going to be pretty seismic shift there.
Cobb0012 asked, any updates on the health of injured players, Corey McIntyre, Jacoby Spells, and any others that I'm missing?
Spells, the last I heard was pretty much what they thought before was that that could go into camp certainly. And it might be like an Asani Redwood thing where it's close. Maybe he's not ready for the first game. And then that like non-conference FCS game, which is Albany this year, get him back. And then, he's a contributor for the formative part of the season. That really hasn't changed. That was the last I heard about that. That's a bummer for them though, because that's a veteran cornerback and just nothing formal on McIntyre, but I mean, we saw that. We saw him limping around, and then one day wasn't bandaged, one day was bandaged on crutches, that left knee. Um, I don't think that actually even came up after the spring game. Now that I mention it, but I don't think that looks good for him in 2024.
Yeah, on the Spells front, I think I remember the first time that Neil Brown mentioned it, said, yeah, that could go into fall camp.
Yeah.
And then
Okay.
the next time he mentioned it, it was suddenly, you know, maybe September. It just caught my attention that all of a sudden it was fall camp, and then all of a sudden it was September. So it seems like you said, that might be one of those that goes towards that first week, second week of the season. Speaking of the first week of the season, Mark Wobbles says, are Big Ten officials locked into the contract for the Penn State game? I was shocked they officiated the game in Happy Valley last year. What a contract.
I had to go back and look at that one because it's almost always the case that the visiting team gets the officials in a non-conference game. So when West Virginia goes to Blacksburg and plays Virginia Tech, you have Big 12 officials. When the Hokies come to Morgantown, you have ACC officials. Every now and then, you'll find a condition that allows you to mix them or have an agreed upon. I honestly don't remember that because it's so common what I just explained that I sometimes gloss past when I look at the game contracts. I'm more interested in the payout, the buyout, all those more, I would say, clicky headlines like, oh, what are they paying? What do they have to pay to get out of it? What's the date? All that stuff. The official thing is so ordinary that I just didn't pay attention to it. I can go back and look at it, but I didn't even realize it until I read the question. I was like, that can't be right. And I went back and I looked and he is right. I should have assumed he was right if he said that, but you would think that this year then that the officials would be Big 12 officials. Don't know. I'll have to see on that one.
That's very convenient. Do you think something as, like, I want to say stupid as that is really like a sticking point in these contract negotiations between these teams? Like, no, 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 no. We need to have the officials that may or may not favor us at all games.
Well, think of like if you're a Big 12 fan, if you're a Big 12 official, are you so partisan that you're going to stand in Happy Valley and give 100,000 people the finger because of a false start you didn't call? I just don't think that that matters. I think it's one of those things where you want to have as much on your side when you're going into enemy territory. And to be frank, Chris, I'm not even sure why it is normal. Like I said, that's such a normal thing that I often don't pay attention to it. I'm not even sure why it is normal. Um, should there be that big of a variance between Big Ten and Big 12 officiating? Is there? It's not the Pac-12. Don't get me wrong, but do you think it matters that much that it is a bargaining thing where someone's like, no, absolutely not. We're not signing this until we get, hybrid officials, until I get my Big 12 officials in Happy Valley. I'm not signing this because I don't want to have Big Ten officials while I'm the road team in State College. I wonder what a hang up that is. But someone did note it. Was the officiating curious last year at all, Chris? I was trying to think of that as well.
Nothing really stuck out to me. I mean, that game ended up the game was like closer than the score would indicate,
Mhm.
I'd argue, but there weren't many egregious calls that really caught my attention. So
Fair enough.
I'm looking. I'll pull it up real quick. Let's see what the penalties were. Take a guess. Do you know off the top of your head
What are we talking about?
how many penalties for each team? Do you think West Virginia was flagged for more, or mm,
Um, well, since we're having the question, I'm going to say that Penn State probably had none, or maybe like one, and West Virginia had like seven. How about like 1 to 7?
it's close?
Oh,
Five penalties on West Virginia for a total of 55 yards. So they were good ones, whatever they were. And then only one penalty for 5 yards on Penn State. Penn State got two first downs from penalties. I'm curious if they were on key drives there.
you know what?
We'll see.
We're going to get fact checked so hard on this right now. Oh, don't
Oh,
you remember
I'm
the?
fact checking right in the middle of it just to be
Okay.
sure.
Yeah.
So
I don't remember that being an issue there, to be honest. But
I don't either.
the fact that this question comes up and there is a bit of a discrepancy there, and like you said, 5 or 55 means I got a couple good ones in there. Maybe they wiped out a return or something like that. I don't remember, but that's almost a year ago now too. So, and I often just don't pay attention to officials too, unless it's egregious, which maybe I forgot that.
Yeah, I'm looking at the first couple ones. I noticed a 15-yard unsportsmanlike on Andrew Wilson Lamp on a punt return.
He hit the
Um,
returner or the catcher, yeah.
and then here's one right here. Early third quarter, West Virginia gets a 15-yard run from Justin Johnson, but he gets called back due to an illegal shift. And then,
That's
yeah,
first
penalty
game stuff.
holding, but the 0-yard gain, so it's not like it brought anything back.
I do remember the coaches saying that Penn State had X number of plays and running plays and didn't get called for a holding penalty. I think it was Jordan Leslie that brought that up, very tongue in cheek, a couple of weeks later.
Yeah, and then there's another one where Penn State had already gotten the first down on a run and then a penalty, a face mask penalty on top of it. So, yeah, I think maybe not so much the calls that were made, but like you just said with Jordan Leslie and his comments, the calls that were not made is maybe
Hmm,
something to be paying closer attention to.
hmm. I'll
Um,
keep an eye on this.
all right. This sounds like a 2,000 word long form you can put up this week
Me?
sometime.
What?
Hey, I can't write 2,000 words. That's way out of my league. Um, JAL1234 says, I agree with the football team winning the over on 6.5 wins. Any reason to think they might go over 7? I see a team that is basically the same on offense, playing a tougher schedule. Last season, they played three good teams, Penn State, Oklahoma, and Oklahoma State, and lost all three by two or more touchdowns. Why should you look for 8 or 9 wins this season?
Well, that's phew, I just think they're better. And I think that it took them some time last year to find their offense. And I think that they're going to actually be at that stage when this season starts. I'm pretty encouraged by what we saw offensively in the final stage of that season. Again, I'd have to figure it out what the bookends are, but there was a period of about, I think it's maybe after the Oklahoma game, and I might be wrong here, but if you look at the statistics that West Virginia would really pin to the board, you're talking time of possessions, first downs, rushing yardage, things like that that really matter to them, snaps. And they were like top 10 in the country in all of those metrics. Now, not for the season, I understand that. But when they got it going and you could compare what they did in the stats that matter to them most to what everybody else did, they were like a top 10, top 12 offense. That's good. And what happened before that? They had major quarterback issues. Their running backs weren't healthy for a while. They didn't know who their receivers were. And that's natural. That's not an excuse. That's just natural. But once they ironed out those issues, they became a formidable offense. And I think that they the spring wasn't really tumultuous. There were no major developments or setbacks or anything there. So it was a lot of just kind of rowing a little bit further down the river. And you hit the start line this year and you should be able to go in a better situation. So I don't think you're going to see the stumbles there. The trouble is with that, they to make a difference relative to this point I'm trying to make, they're going to have to win some games at the start of the year, and they could or they should. Penn State notwithstanding, like I'm not sure that they beat Penn State or that we're saying they should, but they're going to beat Albany. They should beat Pitt. The early part of their Big 12 schedule, I want to say, isn't the most difficult, so they're going to have to win those difference makers in the back end. And I think some of their harder games, obviously, are in conference play, but also toward the end because they're probably supposed to play some meaningful football at the end. This thing, when you look at it, they're going to be a higher team in there. And I broke this down last time. Like, they're going to beat Albany. They should beat Pitt. They have some of the lower teams in the conference, Cincinnati and Baylor. And then, yeah, they're hard games on the road. Some of their hard games on the road, but are they going to lose all three of those? I would say no. Their toughest opponents are at home. Are they going to lose all four of those? I would say no. So you're getting 2 or 3 wins out of that, and it just adds up over time. I think you can get to 8 and maybe 9 a lot easier than you could in any other time in Brown's time here.
Rolling through the way too early top 25 here. And again, they noted that 3 losses to 3 good teams by significant number of points. Not disputing that. But I'm looking here and what I think, I don't know if this, first off, can let's debate one part of this.
Sure.
Is this schedule tougher than last year?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Tougher as in the top teams are better, or it's just deeper, like there's not as many weak teams on the schedule.
I don't think the bottom is going to be as bad as it was this year. You figured the Houston and Cincinnati's and BYU's, UCF's. I think UCF's a little bit further ahead, but they're going to have a better grasp and better depth and better rosters. Fewer questions about that. The trouble is that West Virginia's not ducking the best teams in the conference here. They didn't duck them. They didn't have to play them last year. Didn't have to play Kansas State. Didn't have to play Texas. And you saw what happened when they played Oklahoma. That could have been advantageous for them. They might have taken 1 or 2 more losses. And in place, they got, Houston, which didn't work out, but probably should have been a win, and Cincinnati, which obviously worked out. I don't see that this year. Again, if you go to the top of the conference and the predictions this year, they're playing a lot of those teams. They're playing them at home, which evens things out, but they're playing a lot of those teams. Arizona, Kansas State. They don't get Utah. I understand that, but some of the top teams, Kansas, they're going to have to play. That wasn't the case last year. That's the big difference to me. And then just getting into some stuff, the talent that some of their opponents added is considerable. Experience, snaps, all conference players. Some of the teams that they're playing have gotten better. Now, will that turn out to be better for those teams? Don't know. As far as a metric for May goes, teams that they're playing have added to their rosters and improved, but so has West Virginia too.
Yeah, and I like your point there about just a second ago about the games being on the road last year. 2 of the 3 opponents that were referenced in the question were on the road.
Right.
They were top 10, 15 teams in the country. Oklahoma State was the only one that wasn't on the road, and that was a game that you can sit back and say, "Hey, West Virginia lost by 2 touchdowns." That I don't want to say it's disingenuous, but it might be a bit misleading. West Virginia was winning that game going into the fourth quarter. That was one of those games that it just went to heck in the fourth quarter with some turnovers on downs. West Virginia got desperate to try to, make a play at the end. And then all of a sudden, it's turning into this instead of like a 3-point game, it's a 10-point game. And then it's a 14, just on and on like that. So I don't think that one was as egregious as it sounds. And then the Penn State one too. Remember that one was another game that was tight. And then Penn State just kind of tacked on that extra touchdown in the final seconds when typically they wouldn't. So I don't know how bad those losses were. And 2 of the 3 were on the road. So, I mean, again, I think West Virginia's better, which was, I think, another point you made just a second ago. I think they are better than they were last year. I think offensively they will be better than they were last year, which is saying something because they were pretty darn good on offense last year. So, um, I don't know. It's a tough one. It's why I think saying the over 6.5 is like, yeah, I feel pretty confident about that. But agreed with the kind of sentiment of the question of, hey, do you really want to get into this 8, 9, 10 win territory with a whole lot of confidence. And for me, the answer is no, not a whole lot of confidence on going that high for sure.
I would have a hard time putting money on 9. 8, I would roll up my sleeves and figure out, all right, talk myself into this, talk myself out of it. But if I see 7, how do I get to 8? That's fine. I wouldn't put too much as like past being prologue. Like people make a big deal out of, oh, they lost the Easton game. They should have had another win. Should have lost to Baylor. Um, could have lost to Baylor. How's that? I would say they should have beaten Houston. They could have lost to Baylor, and didn't work out. Obviously, the way that West Virginia wanted one game and didn't work out the way Baylor wanted on the other. Those things tend to even out over the course of a year too. So while West Virginia had a game like Oklahoma State, where the big problem there was the game was 60 minutes long, can't do anything about that. There were other times that year where West Virginia benefited from being able to just impose their offense on teams and wear them down and run away from them and create distance, like UNC, like UCF, BYU, Cincinnati got away a little bit. That wasn't so much, but um, those things tend to even out over time too. So I wouldn't be too meta when it comes to using the past to figure out what's going to happen next, or to explain or justify why you feel about a certain way. Because everything changes so much now from one season to another, Chris, that even that stuff about luck, I get that luck, like dropping interceptions, or sometimes that stuff evens out. But so much changes when it comes to personnel on your side and on the other that you really do blank slate a lot of stuff.
Final question here from D Sand 7. What are the odds that WVU's starting quarterback in 2025 and 2026 are on the roster or committed right now?
Good.
And let me add in a little extra piece here to set you up for something. Did your answer change with this past weekend's news?
Yeah, I felt pretty good that it was gonna be Markio, and if it wasn't, they were gonna go out and make an addition. Like if they see him this year and it's just like, man, it never took off. Like Green's the guy, but on our Monday nights and in the 20% of snaps he gets, we just didn't see him get to that other level. I would expect them to go out and get a quarterback from the portal. Chris, we talked about this before the spring that they might want to get another quarterback. They did. Now, granted, that might have something to do with losing Sean Boyle to the transfer portal. Might have something to do with them just telling Boyle realizing this isn't for me. I'm not going to make it here. But you still need to fill that spot. And they essentially did. They lost one redshirt freshman. They added another redshirt freshman. I don't know what's going to happen with the position or with the addition this year, but they got a kid who's got a really big arm, has a little bit of pedigree, but is super confident. And there's no way that guy's coming in to be a backseat driver. He's coming in to take the steering wheel at some point. He might do it, he might not, but that's going to be his attitude. That's going to shake things up. That'll be good for everybody. I feel a lot better about that now that he's Ryder Burton. Now that Ryder Burton is on the roster and in here, it's either going to be him or Markio that is your quarterback in 25 and or 26. Um, what'll that do to the futures of Wilkins or Chris, help me. Who's the 25 quarterback? Scotty Wolf? Is Scott Wolf the guy from Party of Five?
Yeah, you're thinking of Party Five. Scotty Fox. Scotty
Scotty
Fox.
Fox. The other Scott Animal. Okay. So yeah, so they literally have a party of 5 at quarterback though. So they're gonna have to figure out what to do, but that's the problem, and that's the part that comes with the position there. So they have a number that they're gonna probably want to work with and keep, in the fold as long as they can. Sometimes you can't do something about it, i.e. Sean Boyle. But what you can do is after the fact, you get a guy like Ryder Burton, who I think he's gonna have the verve, the attitude, whatever, to make this very interesting.
I'm with you. I think at the very least, adding Ryder Burton gives you a better third option. Again, I like Khalil Wilkins. I saw him put on quite a show right in front of Neil Brown, 5 feet away from me, and it was impressive. He's still very raw. He's still very young. You bring in Ryder Burton, you have added in a better third option for West Virginia this year in case of dire emergency, and you've added an extra competitor for that starting job after Green graduates after this year. So I think in retrospect, it certainly seems like a no-brainer for West Virginia to add in that room.
May I ask you a question?
Sure.
Overall health here. They've added a junior college tight end, number one tight end in the country. They went out and they grabbed I don't want to say a project, but somebody whose best football is probably still yet ahead of him. Please correct me if I'm wrong there. Um, and then the defensive backfield, they get a quarterback. They were having a hard time getting into the 80s before Chris. Now they're above the cap and they're doing luxury additions, I guess you can call them. I'm not being a cheerleader here, but how healthy is his situation currently, and especially when you contrast it against the first couple of years under Brown?
Oh, it's way better. I think this is the most, even going back to Holgerson's time and when he took over. Again, Holgerson started in a similar spot where he started in it with a roster that was pretty depleted as far as overall numbers go. But getting these numbers up here can only help you. It will not hurt you. You will have more competition. You will have more options. You will get more eyeballs on things. You'll have more depth. Um, so I think this is about as healthy as I've seen it in ages. Like, I mean, ever since I've started doing this. So that dates back to the tail end of Bill Stewart's time. This is the healthiest I've ever seen the roster as far as total numbers. Again, got to keep improving on the overall talent and the top end talent, but the depth and the numbers is about as good as I've seen it.
Could say the same about your answer there, Chris. About as good as I've seen it. That'll wrap it up here. All the questions shaken out of the bag, all the answers shaken out of our heads. More questions, more answers, I'm sure, in the future. That's the way these things go. Until then, I am Mike Assassin.
And I'm Chris Anderson.
We will talk to you then.